is I believe this food crisis, coronavirus, is connected. And I believe that not only are most of the comorbidities related to inflammation, and pre-existing conditions, whether it's heart disease, high blood pressure, et cetera, as well as obviously, lung and asthma. But, that tying back to inflammation, so much of that is food related. And, the poor diet that most people have access to, the high prices of organic and healthier food, the low prices, which are all subsidized by government intervention for junk food. For junk food, you're paying for it 3 times. You're paying a cheap price on the grocery shelf. You're paying for it in your tax dollars in the form of enormous subsidies. And the biggest price you're paying is the healthcare tab. So I think this has brought into focus, the inequities and injustices in the American food system. And it's brought it home in a way that's tragic and almost, for me, hard to watch, because it's been such a huge "I told you so." But now I think the positive is that there's so many more folks who are conscious of it and are thinking about it and working on it and trying to not only implement stuff on a day-to-day basis, but also thinking about the long term. So, unfortunately, it takes this type of catastrophic crisis to catalyze, these new discussions. That, we're seeing a renewed focus on employee rights and welfare for the folks actually doing the work, whether it's cashiers or clerks or baggers or delivery folks. And there's a new labor movement in this country growing. I think it's really about making sure your P&L makes sense and is healthy, and that you figured out your sales channels, your go-to market. You have some sort of chain of communication with your key retail partners and distributors, making sure you understand how much of a priority you are for them, as the SKU rationalization process is real, and that you've got multiple channels of sale outside of that. I do think there's still a really important role to play for those companies and entrepreneurs and businesses that are trying to do right, that are trying to do better, for the existing food system. And I think it's important that they continue to navigate those waters, stay in shelf, develop redundant supply chains for raw materials and ingredients, make sure their co-packer relations are strong, the contracts are tight, and maybe even develop some additional co-packer relations. Most direct to consumer is more than just a thing now. I mean, the growth in e-commerce and online is here to stay, with not only, the mainstream outfits like Instacart and Shipt and Favor, but Mercado, which smaller specialty retailers are starting to utilize so that they have a delivery aspect. Or finally, make sure that their social mission ties in, because, whatever you're going through now as a business ties back to, the social and economic policies that got to this place, and it's not going away. This is going to be a new reality for us. The organic space, I think, is the most resilient and is the least fragile in terms of how it's going to weather this storm, because I think organic consumers, as long as there's supply, will buy organic. And that goes for a growing move towards regenerative organic. As Patagonia Provisions opened up an online marketplace, of which I've been a part of, and the sales have taken off in a way that exceeded expectations. Thrive Market is doing really well. I'm an advisor with Good Eggs, which is farm to doorstep e-commerce provider that does mostly organic and regenerative products on the West Coast, doing really well. So both qualitative and quantitative, everything I've heard, and this is just like during the Great Recession in 2008 to 2011, organic really carried the day, like that continued to grow. Investor community is obviously going to be very risk averse. I mean, they're going to park their money when it looks like a sure hit. I have a couple of companies that are raising investment, and their cash flow is good, their debt's low, and their sales are on the upswing, and that's helpful for investors to see. And I don't think investors are going to continue throwing money at bullshit. And there's been a lot of bullshit in the food industry these last few years. A lot of startups that look particularly geared towards raising funds, and eventually pumping and dumping, selling it within 3 to 5 years, as opposed to folks that came into the food industry as a life choice. Like, hey, we love food. We want to make good, healthy, nutritious food for everybody to have. This concept of mutual aid is here to stay. And, with all these networks popping up, whether in the Bay Area or, New York and its surroundings, in Texas, I'm seeing it in most major cities in the Midwest and the Northwest, those networks aren't going to go away. They'll find a way to get sticky. And whether or not businesses or organizations or just more relationships come out of it, I'm seeing this as sort of that same wave of grassroots activism that happened around the turn of the millennium, where you had a lot of sort of millenarian fears about Y2K, and a lot of it turned into community gardens and community scale food production and smaller farms. A lot of folks sort of went back to the land, whether it was in cities or a lot of folks my age really tried growing food and producing food, and that stuck. And that's where a lot of what you see now came about in the 90s and early 2000s. And likewise, what you're seeing now, I think, is going to create another generation of folks that are conscious and active around food access and delivery.